It's going to be in English, so we prefer to do in an international language rather than in Portuñol. So we have now three great representatives of the Portuguese movement. So as Christina mentioned before, there are already 18 countries that join the GSG. Oftentimes we look at the US, the UK, etc. And as I mentioned, it's also sometimes good to just to see at our neighbors. So we are presenting today the Portuguese case. Portugal, it's really a very interesting case that proves how the private, the public, and the third sector can work together. And we have here today exactly three people representing such sectors. So first we have Philippi Almeida. Philippi Almeida is the chair, the president of the unit mission of Portugal Inovação Social, which is the unit at the government of Portugal that is, well, he will explain it, running and implementing the social innovation and social investment strategy in Portugal. We have Antonio Miguel. Antonio Miguel is the managing director of MAIS, formerly Social Investment Lab, and they were in charge of running the Portuguese National Advisory Board. Okay. And he's also been very engaged in structuring social impact bonds in Portugal. He was part of social finance in the UK, right? He was engaged in the Peterborough Social Innovation, the SIB, the Social Impact Bond. So he knows very well the markets and the singularities. And finally, Luis Mello is the director of the Gulbenkian Foundation, big, very large Portuguese foundation that has decided really to go deep into the social investment market and to promote it. No? Something that in Spain also, as Lisa mentioned this morning, it's very important not to count on social impact investors or the government, but also foundations have a very important role to play in the ecosystem. So I will let our speakers to start. The idea behind this conversation is that we can learn in a very didactic and easy way the process and the storytelling of the Portuguese case. So I will let Luis from the Gulbenkian Foundation start first. Thank you.
Buenos días, encantado de estar.
Good morning. It is a pleasure to be here today with you. As José Luis just said, we are going to be speaking English because I'm sure that you have seen that our president has been here for 2 weeks ago, and he tried to speak Spanish, and it wasn't such a good experience because we have the feeling that we know how to speak Spanish, but in the end we don't. That's not true. The gentleman is speaking perfect Spanish. This is the interpreter speaking. But I'm going to say something in Portuñol. Beside the narrative that we're going to be sharing with you and the story that we're going to share with you, the message is that if it is possible to do it in Portugal, then you can do it anywhere else. And the best would be not to focus on the difficulties.
Switch to English. That's where the Portuñol doesn't work. It's not to look at the barriers, but actually find the right champions and the right people to try and make this movement sparks. That's what we have done in Portugal, and actually that's what the Gulbenkian Foundation has been doing since its inception in 1956. So we are, as José Luis said, we are a big foundation in Portugal, incepted by the will of our founder. It was really a lucky shot because he was not Portuguese. He was born in Istanbul from an Armenian family, made an enormous fortune on trading oil. It was also a great art collector, And during the Second World War, he was traveling to the US, and one of the traditional routes was through Lisbon. And when he was in Lisbon, he got severely ill there, so he had to stay in Lisbon for quite a while. And he was so well treated, so well received, that he decided not to go to the US, but to spend the rest of his life in Lisbon. And by the very end of his life, he decided to give all his fortune, and he was one of the healthiest people, richest people in the world back then, to establish this foundation that was supposed to curate his art collection and work on art, science, education, and charity. So basically, we manage a quite wide range of activities, but the common ground of all these activities is to foster innovation, even when these sort of buzzwords were not incepted. Actually, also on the social side, and I give an example of that. Back in the 60s, the foundation created national networks of mobile libraries that were aiming to promote literacy across the country. And we must remember that back in the 60s, we were still run under a dictatorship with really low school levels, and this was really an innovative approach that was make really a boost in terms of literacy across the country. So this trying to find new solutions to target social needs, it's in our DNA. That's why when this sort of concepts started to emerge, like social innovation, venture, philanthropy, we adopted them quite organically, not for the sake of being something new that we want to do now, but actually these concepts were echoing what we were already doing, and they give us the right framework to speed up that track. So that's what happened in 2007, 2008, when we adopted these concepts as our concepts, particularly social innovation, and we devoted all our work on grant making for social affairs to that matters, and really mapping out what was going on across the country, and giving grants to develop that early stage development for this new solution. So this way of always try to, in a quite organic way, improve our grant-making work. That's our daily job. That's what happened again back in 2013 when this buzz around impact investing was emerging, particularly, as José Luis said, in the Anglo-Saxon world, and we started to question ourselves if this was feasible also in Portugal, and what was the best way to adapt these tools. And we cannot forget they are only tools, and sometimes we look at these things as, of the innovation from the financial side, which is important because we need to leverage more resources and financial resources to this sector. But these are all only means. The end in itself is actually to find better ways to tackle these issues. And also from another point of view, the issue that we also try to resolve by using these tools is better access and better funding for the social organizations that are making the change. And we are basically mediators and facilitators for that movement. Sometimes when we discuss impact investing, we tend to focus only on the investing side and all the technicalities about these new tools, and we cannot forget that the ultimate goal is not to develop new tools, is to develop better solutions to tackle social needs, and this is just a means. And particularly in Portugal, the access to proper and better funding is quite a big issue, and that's why that resonates a lot as a question for us. How can we best develop this? But of course, we could have some resources, some financial resources, some know-how, but we were not experts on the field. And again, I spoke about a lucky shot when Gulbenkian decided to give his fortune to establish the foundation. I think we were really lucky when we decided to create an organization. It was our first grant that was specifically devoted to establish an organization, so it was a grant for to support core costs and to create basically an intermediary that could bring that knowledge and expertise that we were lacking, and without it, all this ecosystem could not be so active at the moment in Portugal, and that was the motto to create and accept the Social Investment Lab back then, now Maze, and it was great, again a lucky shot that António Miguel, that was working in social finance, was willing to come back to Portugal, and he was one of the experts, the big experts in the field internationally, and he is running since the day one the lab. Now I joke with António when I say that his team now is bigger than my team in the Gulbenkian, so which is a good thing, because without the work of António, and this is just to stress the fact that the role of intermediaries are really important, and that's sometimes when we look at this sector, we tend to focus only on the transactions side of it. Of course, they are important, and I will speak about it in a minute, but also these market building activities and that sort of access to and support of people that really knows the field and that can make the links between all the public, private, and sector stakeholders is critical, and that's the job of the Maze now, and they have done it wonderfully. So when we incepted the lab, there were three main goals that we wanted to achieve. One was more on the research side and see how can feasible these new tools could be adapted and used in Portugal. Another one was, of course, if we wanted to create this ecosystem, we could not done it by ourselves, only the foundation. So that was the goal and the objective of the creation of the task force. Basically, we replicated what happened in other countries, and the NAB that António will then explain a bit better gathers all the national stakeholders from all the fields, from the public side, from the private side, from the social organization side, which is also quite important. And we came up with really a roadmap to develop this ecosystem until 2020, and also some stories to tell. So basically, now I can just. So, as I said, we have done basically two things. One was to work as champions of the market. Basically, thank you. Basically, we have supported the first transactions in this space. We were investors, so we invested now in 4 social impact bonds. We also have funded some social organizations together with some impact funds in the mezzanine way, with a grant and then an impact investor. And that is important in order to showcase that this is possible. And this is possible, as I said, in a country that is, from the social side, is still a bit traditional. But if the needs are high, so the need for innovation and better funding is also high, and that, I think, created the right incentives to develop this market in Portugal. That, of course, it is small and will continue to be small, because we are not a big country, but we believe that we can work as a blueprint for others to see what can be tested there and then replicated in other countries. These are I just sum up here some 6 lessons about our work. One, it was particularly referred by Christina, the important role of having the government engaging, and I think that was really a success factor, was from almost day one, and with different governments, because we had the elections in the middle, and at that time we were like a bit scared if the things might change, and they have not changed. So government engagement was really critical, and the need for champions, which is almost the same thing, and also from the government sector we have that sort of engagement. I think now our challenge, I think we have a good engagement at the top level of the government. When I say that, is like from ministers, secretaries of state. I think now our challenge, and maybe Philippe can speak a bit more about it, is how can we best engage the mid-level public sector organizations, that they are the ones, for instance, on finding new ways to commission, to do public procurement and better commissioning are the key persons. And as I said, it's important. This is a bit of cliche, but in Portugal, it makes really a difference to have a clear vision. And for us, it was really, from day one, we knew that we will never be a big market. We want to work, as I said, as a blueprint for others, and we have the right scale to test this new approaches. Then, and Antonio will speak about that shortly after, to have an action plan. And I think for the role of the NAVs and the task force, is really important that the recommendations are actionable, that you have a roadmap for each one, and you know which people you need to involve. And most in the most cases, those are the people that are already engaged in the task force, and it's really important that they, assume that sort of commitment, that they will play that role after we have the report and the recommendation. Of course, there are sort of standards, and the standards are important, but there are always the need to adapt to the local context. And in our case, for instance, the use of SIBs, we are framing it not on the side of, on the savings side, and more it is not linear the way you can, link your intervention with the savings, but actually we are framing it more in terms of risk management with the public sector, that they will only pay for the results and not for the intervention itself. And to end, and in Portugal that was really important, the need of having quick wins. And our first SIB, it was really a SIB pilot, a tiny SIB of 120K, working with roughly 70 kids, where we were using coding lessons to improve the school performance, and also the problem soft skills like problem solving. And it was a really not that long. It was a 1 year and a half intervention, but that put us on the map, and that was, and make the case not only nationally but also internationally. And that is it. And I think now the stakes are high, and we managed to, in a short period of time, to achieve quite something, particularly by having now this chance of having EU funds devoted for the sector. So now the stakes are high, and we know that we are on the radar. But at the end of the day, it's the delivery that makes a difference, and that is now our focus. And more for the foundation perspective, this is really not merely a hype or a trend, but more and more we are embedding these practices not only for the grant making side, but I hope, and that at the foundation's side doesn't happen that often, is how can we best engage the grant making teams with the investment teams, because that will be for the foundations the next level, is how also from the asset management perspective of the foundations, what role they can play. And I think that for us, that's our next challenge.
Yeah. Antonio, please. Thank you.
Buenos días a todos.
Good morning, everyone.
Thanks for listening. I know it's been a long morning. It's also great to see so many familiar faces in the crowd. I'm going to very shortly just talk about who is MAIS and the National Advisory Board in Portugal. So MAIS is an impact venture that was created by Carlos Gulbenkian Foundation. So I've got my boss here with me in the panel. But as Luis said, I think one thing that has been setting us apart is that it's not only about financial support. It's about non-financial support that we've been getting from the foundation. the one reason why we are here today and why Portugal has a 150 million euro fund for social innovation is because Calouste Gulbenkian Foundation provided the access to the right networks within government and the public sector. And I could tell many stories on why non-financial support has actually opened up the best opportunities. Maze is an intermediary. We're a team of 8 people, and we work relentlessly to make sure that entrepreneurs don't stop having impact due to lack of access to finance. This was the hypothesis by which we were created, and we very soon realized that it's not only about finance, it's also about skills, and it's about technology and data. And today, we work in 3 pillars. One of them is to strengthen ventures with the right skills, and for that we run 4-month acceleration programs. We also work on the capital advisory side. We are raising a 40 million early stage venture capital fund to invest in Portuguese and European impact ventures, which will be closed by the end of this year. And we are working with the public sector to make sure that the public sector doesn't make intuitive decisions, but rather data-driven and informed decisions. Why am I explaining what Maze is? Because I just want to stress Louise's message. It is really important for a market to have an intermediary or various intermediaries. And if I look at Spain, I see many examples of that. I mean, José Luis is a homeborn leader for this, and it's really, really important to have entities that can dedicate their time to create deals, to build the market, and for that, I mean, people need to have the funding to pay the salaries. That's the most important thing. So philanthropic support upfront and in the early days of the market is crucial, and if an analysis had been made on the most mature markets, I would say one of the biggest predictive factors is having an intermediary organization from the start. That was the same in the UK with social finance. So enough about Maze. We've launched 4 social impact bonds, so also very happy to share that later on. So we were created in 2013, but in 2014 we launched the National Advisory Board. The key question to ask here is, why did we create a National Advisory Board? Is it because it was fancy and the UK had it? No. It's because, and probably you relate to this, it's because our countries are very, distrust a lot new concepts. We don't believe in concepts. I would go to talk to the public sector about Peterborough Social Impact Bond. They didn't care about Peterborough, it was far away. I would be talking about the social impact bond and say, oh, that's the kind of thing that only works in the UK. It will never work in a country like Portugal. So why a National Advisory Board? Because we had to have the key decision makers in the country together as ambassadors of what we wanted to do. So we don't want them to suddenly shift all their work to impact. We just want CEOs, public sector leaders, academic leaders, social sector leaders to know what impact investing is, and when they are in their meetings, they can talk about impact investing and the opportunities. So reason number 1 was to create a group of key decision makers that bought into the idea. So we put together a group of people from the private, the public, and the social sectors. The other thing that was very important was to do something that was meaningful. So how did we go about and do it? Calouste Gulbenkian Foundation, when Calouste Gulbenkian Foundation sends an email or an invitation, people respond. So it was a convener to make sure that the decision makers we wanted to have on the table, they were coming in. We have done the secretariat. So we have done the research work, because there are no miracles. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. And it's not only about meetings. And we counted on the friendship and the close partnership with Social Finance UK, because more mature markets, the good thing of being followers, like we are, Portugal, is that we can learn with those that have done first, so we don't make the same mistakes and we run a bit faster. So we brought in Social Finance UK to give us their help, and we've adapted a lot of the things that don't make sense in Portugal but make sense in the UK. Then what we organized, it was launched in July 2014, was a group of people that would have plenary meetings. So every 3-4 months we would have like a big meeting with the C-level, very senior representation. But then we also divided them into different working groups where we had operational people within each member organization that we could work on a regular basis. So work would happen here, but then in the plenary meetings, people could just read the papers that we were producing, validate, have a discussion, and then we would go back to the working groups. And we also put together a team within Maize and Social Finance that were preparing research notes for each of the working groups. So the reason why I'm saying this is that the work happened at 2 levels. Very operational, and then brought up to a plenary level so that people feel empowered and inclusive in the decisions. The other thing that was very important, and probably I shouldn't say this, but I'll say, is that day 0, we sat a group of people together and we said, what do we think are the recommendations that we want to convey? We say, okay, these 7, I mean, it cannot go very different from these 7. So rather than starting a process very open and let's reach 7 recommendations, the team already knew what kind of recommendations we wanted to convey. So we worked backwards, and that's, some can say, less creative, probably, but it's much more pragmatic and it's much more efficient. We ended with different recommendations than the ones that we've conveyed initially. So we allowed for that creativity. But if we did not have a starting point, I think we would still be debating how to write a report and what would be the recommendations. So that is very, very important, or at least in our case. So the other thing we learned was that, so, you know, the visible output is a report, which is available online. I'll show you in a second. Rather than, some countries did 15 recommendations. I mean, that would be a lot for a country like Portugal. So we did 5. Each recommendation would refer to a variable or a key part of the market. So we have 1 recommendation for demand, more programs to build capacity of impact ventures, 1 recommendation for supply, test new and adequate instruments of finance for ventures, 1 in the area of the public sector, start paying for outcomes and stop paying only for outputs, 1 in terms of market intelligence, we need data, and 1 for intermediation, we need intermediaries. Very simple recommendations. For each recommendation, there was an action plan. What needs to happen in 1 year, in 2 years, or in 3 years, and in 5 years. And more than that, who in the market needs to make that recommendation happen. So now, we will, on June 20th, present a progress report. And what's interesting is that some things happened, some things did not happen, so we know where we need to focus. And I wanted to share very quickly a couple of things that have happened. So we now have tax incentives for social impact bonds. So if you invest in a social impact bond, you can have up to 130% tax deduction on the taxable profit at the end of the year. We've implemented capacity building programs and acceleration programs. We've implemented Portugal Inovação Social, Philippi will explain. We have a central outcomes for social impact bonds. We have 4 social impact bonds implemented. The last call had 15 applications, so many more to come. And we have created something that Cristina presented before as a unit cost database. We have created one for Portugal. And I'm just going to show you how it works. So, it's still not available online, but basically, you have here, in Portuguese and in English, information about the unit cost database of different indicators. So you want to know, you want to do a social impact bond to avoid children for going into the care system, You go here, social protection, children and youth, child or youngster in foster care. You've got how much the government is spending per month, what's the name of the indicator, what's the likelihood of being updated, the reliability source, the methodology, the historical breakdown of the cost. You can translate it into Excel, and we are now building an automatic calculator so that those of you that want to do social impact bonds and want to build the financial case, you can do it just in a few clicks with reliable data from government. This was a partnership between all of these organizations that are here that are helping the market to be more efficient. Does this generate revenues? No. Why is it possible? Because the foundation provided the initial grant support for this to happen, and the government opened up the data so that the market can use. The only other thing I want to share is the whole process of the Portuguese NAB is here, and it's probably one of the things I'm most proud of, is that you have access to all the minutes of the meetings in Portuguese and in English, so you can see how the process changed from July 2014 through August, and you always have the minutes of the meetings and the presentations. EVPA presented in one of the workshops until February 2016 or June 2015 when it was presented. So I just wanted, sometimes it's not easy to find the website. I just wanted you to have the website here so that you can use for your reference. To end my presentation, just want to share some very pragmatic learnings. First thing is, we needed senior people, but senior people don't have time to work. So what we did was, we have a two-tiered approach. So imagine an organization would be in the task force, the CEO would be there and she would participate in the meetings, but then we had a focal point that had to allocate at least 8 hours a month to the task force. We signed that beforehand. So we could actually chase that person for information. It's very important to have a range of different interactions with members, because some people might not want to be active participators in plenary meetings, so we did a lot of one-to-ones, focus groups, etc. As I said, in Portugal, people didn't believe in what social impact bonds were or social investment. So actually, from the task force, a pilot project of a social impact bond was launched, the one Luis was presenting. It was a very tiny thing, but it made people work together, and suddenly we didn't need to explain what social impact bonds was using Peterborough. We could explain what social impact bonds were using a Portuguese example with Portuguese people to a problem that people related to. And what started with a 120,000 euro for 70 kids education social impact bond is now in the brink of being a 2.4 million social impact bond working with 50,000 young kids because of what we learned in that first pilot. So a quick win is really important. And last but not least, it's really crucial to have the key decision makers in place, because it gives a lot of credibility to the movement that you are creating. So I'm done. Thanks very much for listening.
Thank you.
Thanks. So, good to go?
Yeah, please
Okay.
go ahead.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, José Luis, for the invitation to participate in these group meetings conducted by Foro Impacto that will hopefully lead to the integration of Spain in the GSG group. I'm very honored to be here, and I'm pleased to share with you some of our experience with this pioneer program in Portugal that we are implementing, Portugal Inovação Social, or in English, Portugal Social Innovation. I see that your translation is not very successful because a few people are using. Do you want me to try in French or Japanese? I don't know if my English is as better as my Portuñol. So I will try in English. If the words run out, I will try Portuñol where it fails. So Portugal Social Innovation is, as you mentioned, a Portuguese government initiative that was created in December 2014 and began operations in 2015. It was created with the purpose of developing the social investment market and promote social innovation and social entrepreneurship in Portugal. It's actually, as I said, a pioneer program. Portugal is the only member state that has allocated part of the European structural funds to develop the internal social investment market. And it was created with two complementary objectives. On one hand, to help social organizations and entrepreneurs to develop their projects. On the other hand, to stimulate and help investors to develop their social investment strategies. To develop this market, the basic idea was based on the recommendations of this task force that Antonio has said, because Portugal Social Innovation is actually, as you said, a product of this process. This is, you have here the history of the process. Began with Fundação Gulbenkian, then the task force, then Portugal Social Innovation has a pioneer public initiative that was only possible because of these recommendations. So, based on these recommendations, the basic idea was to create innovative financing instruments that could answer to this quest of creating meeting points for supply and demand. So if the idea is to develop the social investment markets, we have to create a room where supply and demand can meet. And we developed 4 different financing instruments. These are 3 of them. I will speak about them briefly. And all of these financing instruments have innovative ways of financing social innovation projects, because all of them have a seat on the table for the investor, because the idea is to create this encounter between the investors and the social entrepreneurs, social organizations. So, briefly, as I said, it's a Portuguese government initiative. The aim is to develop the social investment market through the finance of social innovation projects. We are managing 4 financing instruments, and we are mobilizing around 150 million euros of European structural funds, specifically the European Social Fund. And with this, and the idea is to create these partnerships between the social organizations and the investors, private and public investors that are willing to finance these social innovation projects and these social entrepreneurship initiatives. So I will present very briefly the 4 pillars, as you asked me to do, the 4 financing instruments, and then I will present some of the major challenges that we had on this process, and then we see what happens in next phase, talking with you. So, the first financing instrument that we are managing is the one over there that we call a capacity building instrument for social investment. It actually is a financing instrument for an early stage of the project. These 4, something that I didn't mention but is important, these 4 financing instruments are roughly aligned with the life cycle of a social innovation project. So the first one is for an early stage where we don't finance directly the social innovation project. We finance the development of management competencies in the teams that are involved in social innovation projects. But we do it in a very innovative way. And I will highlight only 2 of the different novelties that these kinds of financing with European structural funds have. The first one is that we promote essentially an on-the-job consultancy instead of training activity, classic training activity. It is possible for the organization to get out of themselves, of their contexts, and go make some course in a certified school with some specialists. It is possible, but it has a cap of 20% of the project. What we are stimulating here is the contrary. The specialists And the experts and the teams that can build these competencies, they come to the organization, they learn actually what the real problems that they have to implement a specific social innovation project to deal with a social problem, and they develop those competencies, those outputs that are needed with the team. We call it on-the-job consultancy. But the major innovation in this instrument that really contrasts with the past is that we are not paying for real expenses. We are paying for the deliverable that comes out of this training process. That's what we call pay for deliverables instead of reimbursing expenses. So it's easy to explain. If an organization has a good idea and lacks, for example, communication skills, they can apply for these instruments, and they say, well, we have to develop a marketing plan, and the marketing plan will cost 30,000 euros with some budgets that they present. If we analyze the process and the application, and if we find that that value is aligned with the market value for that kind of product, we contract that product. And then the organization don't have to explain how much they actually spent on the marketing plan. They just have to present the market plan, and we pay 30,000 euros. We don't ask how much did it cost, because we already made a price for that marketing plan. That's how we are working. This is very new for social entrepreneurs, and especially for social organizations that were used to a different kind of mindset. So we had our first call with 168 applications, around 7.85 million euros of financing needs. We approved 99 projects of 3.5 million euros. Very soon we will open a new call for 7 million euros around that. And that has been a success considering all the novelties that are around this financing instrument. So, and in this first financing instrument, where is the seat on the table for the investor? The investor doesn't have to pay anything, but no application is accepted without a letter from one public or private investor that says, this is a very nice project and I consider to finance it in the future, but I don't compromise yet. So this is the first approximation between demand and supply. Then we have the Partnerships for Impact that are actually the program that finance directly the social innovation projects. And the story is very simple. This is the most classic instrument that we have, and the novelty here is that we have a match fund model. We finance 70% of the project, and the other 30% have to be financed by one or more social investors, public or private social investors. We had a first call of 57 applications of around 10 million euros of financing needs for that 70%. We approved 35 projects that represent 7 million euros of European funds and 3 million euros of social investors. This was the very first approach to the markets with no, actually no oriented strategy towards the market. So this is very, how you would you say, spontaneous response for the markets. And it is interesting. Now it's not that we are in a very completely different phase. I will talk about that in a minute. But in this phase, it's interesting to understand that the other 3 million euros of social investors are mainly from Fundação Gulbenkian, of course, the main social investor in Portugal. It's been a key player for development of this context. We have a lot of municipalities. Half of this value is from municipalities and intermunicipalities associations. So the local government is very, very important to development of this market because they know the projects, the needs of the community, they know the social organizations, and they are eager to invest this 30% because we put 70% on the top of this investment. So it's very important. We still lack private for-profit investors. We have some, but not as much as we should, because we are in the first steps. It's not the reality by today, but this was approved 2 years ago. 1 year and a half. What we have now is that we have already 2 calls after these ones. They are not closed yet, but we have a lot of demand for a lot of applications with very different social investors involved, and it has been actually quite a success, these Partnerships for Impact program that is very simple to implement. Then we have the social impact bonds that you all know. We have already talked about that. The social impact bonds, they support innovative projects. Of course, they have to have some kind of innovation, but the focus here is on the measurable social outcomes that they should provide and the public savings. We don't have yet operational in Portugal this platform that Antonio showed, the one-cost platform, but that it will be. It's secret, please don't tell anyone. No one knows yet, but they will know soon. We'll present it maybe later in June or July in Portugal, and it's almost done, and it will be a breakthrough because it will allow us to evolve from reimbursement of real expenses to the payment for results. That's what we are trying to do in Portugal. We are not there yet. The idea is that if the contracted social outcomes are met, social investors are fully reimbursed, but they are fully reimbursed for the real expenses that they had with intervention, not for the result itself, because we didn't have yet an effective tool to understand what is the real value of that result that is accomplished, that outcome that is accomplished. And we will have it soon, and we are hoping that this will be a big transformation in Portugal and reference to other countries as well. We had a first call, and we approved 3 projects of around 1.5 million euros. Those projects where Fundação Gulbenkian is the investor that add to the first pilot project where Fundação Gulbenkian was also the investor. So we have now 4 social impact bonds operational in Portugal. We are now analyzing 15 applications in the previous call, in the second call. I believe that this is secret as well. I believe that in this analysis we will approve around 10 or 12 social impact bonds just for the education. There are social impact bonds only in education. We have around 108 social impact bonds active in the world, so in Portugal we will soon have more than 10% of that. It will be actually a reference for the learning process of how to implement social impact bonds in the world. We will actually tomorrow we will open a new call for social impact bonds in different areas, not in education, in Portugal. So these are the first 3 financing instruments that reimburse for expenses. The 4th financing instrument actually is a financial instrument. Where is the? Okay, let me see if I can switch it. Let's see. Let's say over there. Not here, over there. The Social Innovation Fund is the 4th instrument that is a financial instrument, and is actually the first financial instrument that is tried to implement with the European Social Fund. The European Social Fund, as you know, is the oldest fund in Europe, the only one that was created, I believe, in the Treaty of Rome. And for the whole time, it's been paying for expenses with non-reimbursable payments and financings. So this is the first time that the European Social Fund tries to develop an instrument that has implicit the revolving mechanism of reimbursement of the financing. So The Social Innovation Fund is not yet operational. It has been very hard to develop because it's very new, but I believe that by the end of the year we'll have it fully operational, ready to go in Portugal. It will be an hybrid model with a debt instruments and an equity instruments. Hybrid model because we have a wholesale in the debt part. We will consider guarantees for loans, and it's retail instrument by the equity part because we will invest directly on equity in corporations in a deal by deal model with other investors, co-investing model, either deal by deal approach. So these are the 4 pillars that you want me to present, and I'll be glad to share. Do you want me to talk about some of the challenges that we had to reach here, or we'll talk later?
So maybe what we can do is, thank you. Maybe we can open up the questions in the audience. Podemos hacerlo entre inglés, portuñol y español.
We can do this between English, Spanish, and a mix between Portuguese and Spanish.
I know in the audience we have foundations, we have plenty of intermediaries, and we also have some government officials. So I think puede ser una conversación muy útil.
This can therefore be a very rich and diverse conversation. So I don't know if anyone wants to break the ice and ask a question to our audience and to our speaker, and make this a bit dynamic. So does anyone have a question?
Buenos días, mi nombre es Nuria Iturriagoitia y trabajo en temas.
Good morning, I'm Iturri Gorriagoita and I work on funds. And from the equity standpoint, I think that this is very interesting for customers. I'm not very well acquainted with this, but I know that Magallanes has created a fund, and because this is supervised by the National SEC, it's quite a complex fund. Apparently, you have to put down 100,000 euros to start off, so that actually constrains the type of customers that you can offer this type of initiatives to. Those 100,000 euros have to do with crowdfunding. And, well, out of all the different experiences that you have been telling, we always see that there's a foundation behind, and we see that there's government involvement. But how do you involve private stakeholders without that entrance barrier, which is so high, those 100,000 euros? Is there a European initiative that can perhaps get to the ESMA, and from that standpoint, can we do something with common sense to avoid those entrance barriers so that this can be accessible to the public in general? Thank you. I'm not going to try to answer you in Spanish, I'm sorry, so I'll switch to English.
That social impact investing needs to be just like any other investment and have different tools, different financing instruments with different levels and profiles of risk return. We just need everything. So I think in Spain actually there's a great example of an equity crowdfunding platform just for impact ventures, La Bolsa Social, which is one of the most developed, if not the most, in Europe. And as far as I understand, actually the average ticket sizes to invest are much lower than the 100K. We also have that regulation in Portugal, but and what is difficult is when you want to do reward-based crowdfunding, it's fine. When you want to have equity, it starts being regulated, and then you need to protect investors so that we don't have all the things that happened in 2008 with the CDOs and all those very creative instruments. So I think it's opening up, and for instance, we in Portugal see, especially from the millennials who have not yet received the wealth transfers from their parents, they want to enter the space with those kind of ticket sizes, and having these platforms is and will be very interesting. So crowdfunding is a way. But for instance, we are raising a VC fund, and we are having that discussion. What's the minimum ticket size? And it's not easy to manage a vehicle like a VC if suddenly we have to manage, I don't know, 20 LPs, limited partners, investors, who each have put 20,000 euros. So maybe then that instrument is not relevant for them. On wealth management, I don't know if that's part of where you work. I think that's where big euros can come from, because family offices that want to advise their clients on where to allocate money, there's more and more opportunities to invest their money, which is a bit more risk tolerant, aligned with the values of the families that are investing. Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, has issued and commercialized a social impact bond within their wealth management platform of $27 million. So it was quite a significant amount. The other challenge before people start chipping in a very steady way is track record. All of this is still very new, so we need to build a track record. That's why data and technology is so important, so that people can make informed decisions.
I just want to compliment, just for a matter of clarification, because it might give you the perception, or we might give you the perception, or give you the perception that the foundation is the only investor in Portugal, and it is not. And actually, now one of the KPIs of my team, and that is on our strategy plan, is mobilization of other private capital apart from the Gulbenkian Foundation. And our work, apart from putting some deals on, is to bring others on the table, because if we were the only ones, it would not be a market. And for instance, with the first SIB that we referred, the Code Academy, Junior Code Academy, we were the only investor, and now it's scaling up with a new SIB that's made an application for this instrument, and it's a 2.4 million euro SIB, and we are not investing in that. And that is really interesting. That it was without this previous one, this bigger one will not appear, but we are not involved in this, and we are really happy that is scaling up with other sources of funding, particularly from the social responsibility part of some big corporations that are operating in Portugal. And of course, this new thing that I think it's quite new internationally, of having that sort of tax incentive for SIBs, are putting also, it's a good incentive for other persons to bring green. And it's, that, because of course we are involved in this, but we are not the only ones, and we don't want to be the only ones.
Thank you. Good that you mentioned the tax incentive, because I forgot to talk about that. That is very important for us, and that is very interesting to mobilize private investors. Concerning your question, just a point: in the social innovation funds, in the debt part, we won't have minimum for the debt. So I believe I will try not to have a minimum. That's our goal. So maybe it's easier to bring the market together, because the banks can make the loans very easily with good conditions. Concerning the investment, of course, Fundação Gulbenkian is not the only social investor in Portugal. There are a lot of those, but was fundamental as a key player in the beginning to create, because Fundação Gulbenkian is an opinion leader, and as they were ahead of their time, they create the market and open the eyes of the other investors, public and private investors. Now we have a vibrant ecosystem of different investors, of course, of private companies, of local governments, as I said, of big foundations, other foundations in Portugal are also investing. But actually, Gulbenkian is in that page of our history as the first one to do that. And that's why you're here, and that's why we are so close in this relationship and this partnership. Concerning the SIBs, just to tell you that we had one of the problems with social impact bonds financed with European funds, European Social Fund, is that we cannot remunerate the investment. So if with European social funds we cannot pay an interest on that investment. And that is a limitation for the social impact investment here. What did we do in Portugal? As we are a very creative people, with actually a very interesting government aligned with this purpose, we created a tax incentive in the tax policy in Portugal that allows a tax deduction of 130% of all the investment that is done in social impact bonds, despite of the reimbursement in the future. So any investor will have immediately a tax reduction of 130% of the investment that they made. And in the future, they can be reimbursed by the accomplishment of the social outcomes. So this is a very interesting public policy way of going around this limitation. I believe that is even more interesting than paying taxes, than paying interest for the reimbursement, because this is a tax policy for the country that can make other references in the world. I think we are doing this, the first steps. Let's see what happens next. But we are very excited with this possibility, and I've been in contact with different investors, private investors, big companies, big corporations, big groups that are now very interested in financing social impact bonds. Now we are shifting our focus. The main focus of Portugal Social Innovation was to develop the demand. We needed to understand which were the main projects, where were the entrepreneurs, where were the social organizations. We had to develop these new ideas, these new social innovation projects. And now we are shifting towards the supply. We need to get more in touch with investors and tell them we have these very interesting projects. These are projects with an history, and you can invest here and even have a tax deduction in social impact bonds. So we are shifting our focus. We are not yet that in depth with the relationship with social investors, but we are making that path just now, and this is an incentive for that.
Thank you. Tenemos 5 minutos más. Una pregunta, Xavi?
We have 5 more minutes. Are there any other questions, Xavi?
Buenos días.
Well, today is a thrilling day here in Spain. I think that this will be a milestone. It will mark the before and the after. When you explained to us the history of Portugal, I remember the story or the history of England, and I compare it to what is happening in Spain, and I try and find analogies between those 3 situations. And what I clearly see is that in the 3 of them, there is a group of explorers, of pioneers, who somehow lead the way. Here we have some of you in the room. And for some years, we have been working on this. And at a certain point, we clearly see that there are leaders in some of the main foundations in the country, and then some leaders in the government who decide to make the social impact, entrepreneurship, and investment agenda their own, and they make the development of the ecosystem a reality. What happens in Spain is that we still haven't identified those leaders from the big foundations or those leaders from our government who will be the champions of this development agenda that you have just introduced. It happened in England, it happened in Portugal, but in Spain it hasn't happened yet. We have a government that seems to be a bit distracted, and we have some leaders in our foundations, but we haven't convinced them yet. So how do we convince the government? How do we convince these leaders from foundations and governments so that they are really involved in our development agenda?
Very simple, muy simples.
In a very simple way.
In my opinion, it's 2 things. So I fully agree with everything you said. One, there's this very thin line and magical way that I don't know how, that you actually, for Portugal, you need to make it happen or look like it's happening to get people excited. So if I go and I talk, I don't know, with the minister, I cannot go with an idea and a PowerPoint. I need to go, look at the pilot. We're working with 70 kids. Look at the pictures. They're improving maths. And I mean, I know it's a bit a dog wagging the tail, like, but at the end of the day, you really need to have a very concrete thing to make people excited, investors and the public sector. The second thing, and this looks a bit manipulative, but I'm hoping between friends, but you need to find who in the government is going to be promoted or benefited by being the champion of this. Like, who is going to make your paper that is under a pile of 100 papers on top again and again? And who do you don't need to chase, because that person will chase her or himself. Like, that's like, it's all about incentives at the end of the day. And I just remembered another one is having local, like, everyone admires a lot Sir Ronald Cohen, but for instance in Portugal now we are at the point, who is the Portuguese Ronald Cohen from the private sector? That is, because we've done that for the public sector, now we need to do it for the private sector. So having people that, it's not international leaders, is national leaders is very important.
Just to say that sometimes when we think about engaging organizations, we tend to think at the people that are leading the organizations. And sometimes, in order to better convince that leaders, the best way is not to go directly to them, but actually, finding the people that are, that sort of buzzword entrepreneurs that can, be at the lower scale in the terms of the hierarchy of the organization, but are actually the ones that can make a change and get, putting this on the radar. That's, for instance, what happens in our at the foundation. It started at a program level. Then we managed to have a member of our board that were like, willing to do it. There was some skepticism in the beginning, and we were lucky that they give us the benefit. They gave us the benefit of the doubt. So you go there and try it. For instance, the first social impact bond in terms of like the size of our investment was not that high, and that gave us the track record now for better embrace the others. So sometimes the key persons are not the people that are leading it. Sometimes are the people that are working underneath of them and make sure that they will engage. That's I think, and that's what happened in Portugal, in other parts rather than the foundation. The first SEEB was launched because the deputy mayor responsible for education was an event of May's, and at the end asked us, I want to launch this initiative on trading using code lessons. Can we fund this through a SEEB? And she was not like the mayor. She was not, able to decide that this would go forward. And so finding those right champions are really critical, and sometimes they are not the leaders of the organizations.
I would like to share if any point in time. Are you going to finish after?
Please go ahead and then I will.
Okay. Do I have an opportunity to come back with the microphone or not yet?
Please, yeah, okay, we can go
yes?
for the last question.
Okay, so then I will say, I would like to express, okay, briefly, I just like to say one thing. I don't know if this is a good news, but we are talking among friends. I've received in Portugal 2 commissions of Spanish parties that are willing to develop a social innovation strategy. They wanted to learn how are we doing in Portugal. I don't know if we can say that, but one of the party that you all know, a Spanish party, wanted to know what is our strategy. So I believe there is a path over there. Something is growing.
There is, but the thing is that it's disconnected, probably, no? No sé si hay alguna pregunta más.
I don't know if there are any other questions, and if not, we will close with just a... Okay, then last question. It is. Thank you. Thank you so much for your presentations. They've been great. Thank you for the event as well. My name is Paula Rico. I work for Zabala Innovation Consulting in the Social Innovation Department. And in line with a comment that was made by our colleague, I wanted to just put on the table what the link is. I would like to know what's the link between the government, intermediaries, and social investments. So how do they relate with local communities? Because in the end, we're talking about social impact. We're talking about activities that will have an impact that doesn't need to be negative. It can be positive with the community. So in the end, what's your relationship with the local communities, with these projects that you're promoting here?
I think the best way to engage that sort of local communities and local organizations is to, they are struggling with access to finance, and the access to finance is almost project-based, short-term. And because they work with short finance, they have money for 2-3 months. They have to apply to any call for proposal that is available with different sorts of reporting. The proposal that we offer is that you will have access to long-term funding that is aligned with your mission. And sometimes we only look at the investment side, but this investment comes also with some capacity building work, because in order for you to report for your impact, you need to make sure that you have the management performance tools in order to report that back. And that's, again, the role of intermediaries are really important, because this sort of deals will only happen with the role of intermediaries that are really, that become good friends of these social organizations. And sometimes you need to first engagement with this proposal. We'll have access to better funding that will turn your work more effective. Sometimes they are a bit reluctant when they see there are some new things that they need to do, but at the end they envisage the potential. And some SIBs that we have are working with social entrepreneurs and new ideas, but others, for instance, we have one on prevention of foster care, and is working with an organization that is, I believe, now more than 30 years ago, and finding this new way of funding a better way to do their job. But that the link to the community and that sort of tackling a social need is needs to be at the core of all this work that are only means to achieve that.
A quick response. I will link the answer to what you said with something that I'd like to stress. Let me just pass to the other slide. I'd like to share from the government public initiative in Portugal. I'd like to stress some of key success factors that were able to develop this initiative and to boost social investment in Portugal. And I would highlight only 3 or 4 of these. This has been very, very strategic and important. The first one has to do with a mission unit. A coherent strategy and an operational central government structure with a clear mission and means to implement that strategy is actually an effective way to achieve meaningful and deep cultural change and actually boost social investment. So we have a central structure, Portugal social innovation that concentrates the public policy instrument that concentrates the public policy for social innovation in the whole country. That is very important. The second thing is that this structure is coordinated at the center of the governments. I work directly with the Ministry of the Presidency that has the responsibility for the social innovation strategy in Portugal, and the Prime Minister. It has been very important not to be allocated in one thematic minister, because if we put social innovation in the education or in social protection or on health, it would be a small program within that ministry. It's very important to be at the center because we have to deal with different parts of the ministry because of SIPs and because of other investments. So we talk with the same distance with every minister. That is very, very important to be at the center of the government. Then, concerning your question, we have a very important activation team. This is not just a public organization that finances projects. We have an activation team, a team of players, a team of people in our group that are on the different regions of Portugal and that have a direct link with social organizations. They know the social problems, they know the local government, they know the investors, and they have to map the projects, they have to mobilize investors, they have to learn where are the social entrepreneurs. And that is very important for us. When we open a call, we know most of the projects that are going to apply because we make this follow-up in the field. That is very important to have a team field. And last but not the least, that could not be possible without strategic partnerships like the ones with the main consultants. Maze is by far the more experienced consultant in consultancy agency in Portugal in social innovation. The partnership with Gulbenkian, the partnership with other foundations, the partnership with local governments, partnership with some big economic groups. That has been very important for us to learn where we should make better, because this is a program that is an experimental program. And so every step has to be adjusted to the reality. And only being able to make this dialogue, Gulbenkian and Maze has been fantastic and fundamental to make better the program that we are developing in Portugal and other players as well. This strategic partnership is fundamental for the success of this process and to understand better what is in the ground, the social problems that we have to deal with and the community that we are developing locally. Thank you.
Bueno, pues thank you very much to three of you. It was a great pleasure. I think we learned a lot of things from the Portuguese case from different perspectives. And well, now I'm going to be explaining what are the next steps for the Spanish task force. And of course, it would be a pleasure to have you very close in our initiative and to learn, as Antonio mentioned before, you were able to learn from other experiences internationally. So we would also be very happy to learn from the Portuguese. Thank you very much. Un aplauso. Seré muy breve porque
I'm going to be very brief because I want to really respect the agenda, the time that we had proposed in the agenda. So it's clear that we have a need in Spain, so we need to get going. We have more than enough talent to be a part of the GSG.
tenemos
We have countries all over the world who have already become members, and as I was saying previously, and Spain, what's going on with us? Are we that distracted? We need to start. We have to get going. So there is talent, there is experience, and answering to Xavi's question, I believe that we have a respected voice that can be used to talk to our government, our foundations. We are people who have been working for a long time, but we also have new faces, and I think that we have enough capacity and credibility to mobilize the people, the right people for this to happen. So how are we going to do this? We have created Foro Impacto, the secretary of the group for social impact in Spain. What would be the task force in English? And it's very important to explain this. This needs to be clear. This is an initiative that was born from civil society, and we hope to have more actors join us. This is an open initiative and a non-biased, non-partisan initiative. We want to boost private social investment, but we also want to mobilize public sector actors. So the idea is for 2019 to be a very important year for Spain, and this should be part of the country's public policies with different colors, obviously, but it should be there. So how are we going to do this? I'm sure you have seen this in the leaflet we have printed. We have created a stronghold, we could say, of organizations that are committed to this. And for it to happen, as I said, there are 3 organizations who have become the leaders: Unlimited Spain, Open Value, and Euro Capital. But we also have a bigger circle that includes strategic partners, reference organizations who have been working on this for a very long time, such as Gawa Capital, Ship2B, and CREAS, who are here today. Thank you so much. They will be all helping us from their own fields, and they will mobilize the sector's actors. And since it is very important, we need to document it all. And we need to have materials. Just like in the case of Portugal, there needs to be training open to the public so that everyone has information so that we can all open. And we have decided to create a partnership with Lisa, with the SADE. She's going to help us map the Spanish situation and the international situation, see what the international initiatives are, how we can bring him here. And then we obviously have to have Cuatro Casas with us and Latam Watkins are 2 big firms, legal firms, that will help us understand the legal framework. And last but not least, we have a partner that will help us deal with the administrations and political forces, which isn't an easy task. But as I said, we're open to dialogue and initiating conversations, and that's why we will have the help of Vinces. And we have a couple of objectives that are mobilizing capital offer. We have already said it. We're from foundations as well as private sector. We need those offers. Intermediaries. The good thing about Spain, and I think that's one of the big differences when compared to Portugal, it's the fact that we have lots of intermediaries here in Spain. Capital demand, that's also very important. We need to be close to, reference entities, social entrepreneurs, for-profit with impact entrepreneurs, but also other companies that are trying to launch bonds and knowledge for training, ESADE and other institutions, I'm sure, that will work with us, and then the regulatory and legal framework. So we have a plan, we have a roadmap, and it's very important. This is not just one event. This has just started, and we hope to finish in a year's time with a final report with recommendations that I was talking to you about previously, and with Spain becoming a member of GSG. So how are we going to do it? With a series of events, activities, work meetings, and so on. And as I said, they will come with documents, debate, consensus, and so on. The next one will be in July 2018. We will be touching upon the part of the capital offer. What are the initiatives, the referent initiatives internationally, and here in Spain we also have some examples of that. And since we want to get out of Madrid, because it's important to get out of our comfort zone, not everything should happen here, we are going to have our second work group in Bilbao, everything that has to do with demand for capital. We will be meeting there. You're all invited, obviously. You're all invited to come to Bilbao for the next session that we will have. And in each of these sessions, we will have a presentation of the progress made by the work groups. But just like today we had the Portuguese case, we will bring other cases to the next meetings, and then October, November, with intermediary reports, and then Barcelona. We will have the last session on the aspects of what intermediation means. We will do it with our Barcelona partners. And all of this will end, as I said, with a final report with recommendations. So actually, the report is not the most important thing. It's the process. We need to have consensus. And when we reach the end, that report needs to be something that everyone agrees with. Everyone agrees with every letter that has been printed on it. That is basic. And in order to end my presentation, since we don't want to unveil everything that we will be doing this year, it's a good friend of ours, Cliff Pryor. And the next meeting, you're all invited, July the 2nd, capital offer, that will be the topic. And Cliff Pryor will be our guest, a wholesale fund, a fund of funds. So it's very interesting to know how they were born. They managed £900 million to invest in intermediaries. So we will have Cliff, and I'm sure he'll be very happy when he sees this slide to see how handsome he is on this picture. And with no further ado, thank you all for coming. This is a process that starts here, a collective process. So now you have to spread the word. And, well, that's it. We'll see you on July the 2nd. Thanks so much.